Final news topic of the week, and pricing has started to emerge for GPD Win 5, which is looking to be the first handheld system to use the Strix Halo APU. Strix Halo, we looked at it recently on Digital Foundry within a mini PC, and suffice it to say that it's a highly capable piece of kit. This is going to be a next generation handheld beyond compare, and it's going to cost a lot of money, as you might expect for an SoC that's like, significantly larger than the PlayStation 5 Pro SoC on the same process node. China pricing has cropped up, and it's looking to be like a maximum of $1,800.
Oh my goodness!
On the pre-sale price. For the 64 gigabyte version of the GPD Win 5 with the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395, which is the best of the best. The 2 terabyte model, it's looking like 1,400, and the AI Max 385 with a 32 gigs of VRAM. That's coming in at about 1,200. The difference there seems to be like you're losing 8 of the compute units from the SoC die there. Oliver, you're our resident handheld specialist. You must be fascinated by how this is all going to come to pass, because I kind of still can't get my head around the fact that people are going to be putting this gigantic SoC within a handheld and expect it to work. But, these guys do know what they're doing.
Yes. Well, certainly based on your testing, it seems like there's kind of a range of TDPs potentially, possibly in that kind of like 45 to 60 watt range, which are kind of cognizably appropriate, at least for some class of handheld, where this chip really sings. I think you're seeing it like operate within a pretty good percentage of something like an NVIDIA, 4060 desktop chip, those kinds of, that kind of class of kind of lower end, mid-range, and whatever laptop and desktop hardware. So it does seem like it works, at least if you can fit it physically within your system. I think the total package is like 400 millimeters squared or something. It's pretty huge.
Yeah, it's huge. Bearing in mind, PS5 Pro is like 280 millimeters square.
PS5 Pro is a lot smaller than this. Console designs are typically smaller than this chip. So it's certainly, it's a multiple chip package, obviously. But yeah, I think it's expensive, but this is like a premium device. It's not a mainstream PC handheld. And there are like no cheap Strix Halo devices. Like the Framework desktop I was looking up with 64 gigs of RAM and an AMX Plus 395 or whatever the top end Strix Halo is $1,600 US. The ROG Flow device starts at $2,100 US, and that's with the, I think, 385 or 390 chip, not even the top 395 chip.
Right, okay.
I think AMD is setting a pretty high price floor with these products just through their own pricing for the Strix Halo package and associated tech there. Because if you look at the Framework site, just the main board for a 395 system with 64 gigabytes of RAM is $1,300. So you presume there's some margin for AMD in there, there's some margin for Framework in there, but it's still like a very high price. And, this is like also, it's worth reiterating, like this is a large complex chip. It's composed of 3 main dies. It has a 256-bit memory interface. This is all expensive to route and whatnot. And AMD is also the only player offering a chip like this, offering a design like this. So when we talk about AMD, or rather when we talk about NVIDIA and Intel potentially kind of entering a similar space with their products, part of the appeal there is we're going to see a little bit more competition for these like larger graphics die products that could potentially fit in low power envelopes there for PC laptops and handhelds. But I do think this price can be justified, especially in a world where you look at something like the Asus ROG Ally Xbox ROG. I always screw that name up, which is something. Name is
hard.
It's hard. I always forget the order. But anyways, where the Xbox Ally is something like $900 US for a Z2 Extreme, like this product, well, or at least it's supposed to be $900 US. They've not actually announced an official price owing to, I think, tariff concerns. So it's like, I think it's launching in 3 weeks. They haven't done pre-orders or an official price, which is pretty nuts. That's obviously got to change very shortly, I would hope. But this is like, $1,600, $1,400, something in that range. A little higher if you want the max specification, which is kind of ridiculous with the 4 terabytes of storage and whatnot. For a device that will outperform that chip by a large margin at, reasonably high TDPs here, I think that's a reasonable offering, especially if this device comes in and it has a good fit and finish, works well, there are no glitches or issues with the external battery pack, and it seems reliable, it seems like a durable product, it seems like a high quality product, I think you're getting your money's worth basically for that additional performance, because the Z2 Extreme, the Strix Point, is not really a close match for Strix Halo in any respect, unless you're really tamping down that wattage, like 15 watts, maybe 20 watts, then there it's more competitive, but 30 watts, 40 watts, 50 watts, if you really want to stretch that chip, it's not going to be able to hold a candle to Strix Halo, I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, there was a part of the video that I kind of kept quite short because it would be actually really easy to use that mini PC to kind of emulate the kind of specs that that's being mooted for these handhelds, right? But there is this one clip that I want to show you where it's essentially Alan Wake 2's PS5 performance mode settings scaled down to 1080p resolution using FSR2 quality mode. So it's essentially upscaling from 720p to 1080p. 1080p is the screen that's being used for this. And 54 watts, you're basically running at exactly the same performance level as the console. Basically you've traded a reduction in power for a reduction in resolution. When you sort of cut to the bone and go down to 30 watts, you're going from like mid 50s down to like mid 30s, which doesn't sound great, but then you're essentially getting what's very, very similar to Xbox Series S performance in what is a very demanding game. And this scene is like one of the most demanding in the entire game. So, there's a lot of sort of reasons to be like very optimistic about Strix Halo handhelds, because, a lot of the trades that you have to make on like Strix Point and Steam Deck and Z1 Extreme, et cetera, you kind of just don't need to make here. And it's liberating, but it's also kind of, you sort of wonder what you're going to do with this surfeit of GPU power. But it's just really, really cool. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how these things actually work from a practical standpoint, because, I think it's like 440 square millimeter die there, counting in all of those chiplets on there. So it is kind of nuts there, but I'm really looking forward to checking it out. It is going to be expensive, but beyond the kind of mainstream devices put out by Lenovo and Asus, these devices have always been expensive from the Chinese manufacturers, and this is no exception. So I'm expecting, probably the US prices to be even higher than what's being mooted here. But it is a very, very sort of niche market, I'd say. It's kind of almost the sort of thing where, they're doing it because they can do it, not necessarily whether it's actually a great idea for a product that's going to sell a lot of units. I'm also sort of interested to see the difference between the AI Max 395 and the AI Max 3, is it the 90 or the 380 that's got the 8 fewer compute units?
I think 385 is the one with 8 CPU cores, so just the one die there, and then I think 32 CUs in the GPU. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that with gaming, the two CCDs, one of them is basically deactivated anyway. I think that's what the Forks was saying about that, which makes perfect sense, because not many games actually need more than 8 cores and 16 threads. And there's obvious power saving sort of advantages to doing so. Alex, thoughts?
Well, I keep thinking like this thing is overspec'd in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And I always wondered, like, what is preventing AMD from making some sort of mid-range APU? Why does it need to just go from like ultra low to like this thing? Like, I was watching your video and I was just like, why does it have so much RAM? I was like,
well,
why
because
does it
it's
have
aimed
so
at the
much
AI
RAM?
market specifically.
Okay.
Where that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, Oliver, you looked at the Mac Studio, which is actually no, AMD isn't really positioning it against. They are positioning it against M4 Pro for AI purposes, which is kind of like Mac Studio territory, but not mega high end Mac Studio territory.
No, I don't think they can reasonably compete against like the Apple Ultra chips. Actually, maybe my M1 Ultra which is now a 3-year-old computer. It also has 120 gigabytes of RAM, has a 20-core CPU, but 4 efficiency cores, so 16 performance cores versus the 16 kind of high-end Zen cores on the Strix Halo device with the 395 Plus Max processor, or whatever it's called. That's probably a pretty close matchup, I'd venture to say, in a lot of respects there. I think part of the reason why they probably don't have a mid-range chip is just the lack of product market fit there. Because you look at these devices, and we're talking about scaling this gigantic chip down to a handheld. There's probably not a huge market, I would venture, for like handheld exclusive chips that might straddle the difference between a Strix Point and a Strix Halo. I think that would probably be the provenance of, a very specialty chip. I don't think that would move massive numbers. I think the Strix Point chip is something that AMD is comfortable with addressing that market. I don't think they're really interested in developing specific products to fit that market. Maybe something like the Intel NVIDIA thing, you could see a bit of a mix and matching kind of chiplet approach. Maybe next generation with AMD, we actually might see something like that with RDNA 5. Apparently that's in the works for a successor device to Strix Halo. But I don't think that's in the cards for now. But certainly at 30 watts, Series S performance, you got a 1080p panel. That sounds like a match made in heaven. That sounds perfect to me. I mean, who could be upset with that? Providing you can provide the appropriate cooling and get that all sorted internally and have okay battery life. Maybe you will have okay battery life. Maybe you won't have room for a battery. Who knows? But maybe that would be. Well, in this case, you don't have room
maybe
for
it's
battery.
A battery pack.
It's a battery pack. Yeah. But I think that could be cool because 1080p display, Series S is that's a perfect marriage in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think they actually target 1440p for Alan Wake on Series S, but with like 800, circa 847p, I think maybe for
847.
Resolution
Yeah, that
on
sounds
that.
familiar. Yeah.
So but it's it's ballpark here, and obviously these devices are outputting to 1080p screens, not to something that's got to kind of look good on a 4K living room display. Interesting nonetheless, and I really do want to check that out. But I guess we just need to wait for these devices to actually manifest.